This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy.
Oh my God, everybody, guess who's back? Bobby Capuccio.
Hey.
You're out of the hammock.
Well, so to speak, not exactly, but it's great to be back on the show. It's kind of weird because we were regularly doing this show when we were literally half a world apart, and up the street, we haven't done it. So yeah, this just feels like home, being back on Roll with the Punches.
It's like I can hear you in through the microphone, and I can also just hear your voice echoing up the street.
Yeah.
From a kilometer away.
That was me. And you're like, oh, turn your music down. Yeah, all right. So sorry about that.
How's Australia for you?
It's, I've always liked this city. I've always loved Melbourne. People are so nice here. I'm not saying that back in the States, people are not nice, but back in LA, but it's a different, genuine level of when you're like, oh, hey, how's it going? They don't just nod at you like, It's like people are so absolutely nice. Like when you go into a coffee shop, sit down for a magic coffee, which is my order of choice over the past couple of weeks.
Oh, you're one of those people.
Oh, yeah, one of those people. What are you, like a long black purist?
No, look, I sway between long blacks and lattes, but you fancy people that invent these weird little different coffees that have special names, and it's very Melbourne of you.
Yeah, but thank you. But it's not like I'm ordering a triple foam latte something. It's like magic, just one word. Magic, and then you say magic when you order. They pour you magic in a cup, and Bob's your uncle. Done. So it tastes pretentious, but when you peel it back and examine it, it's a very non-pretentious order and quite expeditious as well. Like sometimes you have to stand in front of somebody on the queue, and it's not an order; it's a complex paragraph in a language you don't understand. That's irritating, but just magic. All right. Here you go. Be ready in a minute.
Do you ever order it and people go, what? What's a magic? Are there ever any baristas that don't know what a magic is? If you went to Tassie, you'd definitely come across that.
Not a single one. I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have all my facts correct, but I think it is a Melbourne innovation.
I went to, how the hell do you know about it then, Mr. LA just landed here?
Well, I looked it up. Just like a pasty is a Cornwall invention, although people in Devon would probably argue that. But it's like, nonetheless, when you go into that area, no one's ever going to question what a pasty is. Where other parts of the world, it's like, huh? What? So you ordering pasta? No, pasty.
I did have to reprimand you a couple of times when you kept using US measurements and US terms, and like what cash points and miles, and I was like,
well, cash point is a UK reference.
Oh, God,
miles is an imperial US thing, not meaning imperialist US. Well, it was an imperialist British thing, but yeah, it's just a imperial system measurement, and it is a bad habit. But I think I've adjusted quite well since then.
You've come a long way. What are we talking about today?
Oh, I feel like I'm starring in a TV series titled Insomnia, and I'm in season 3 now. It could be remnants of jet lag. It could be I've got so much going on right now. To put it mildly, last night, just shy of 2 a.m., my eyes just popped open, and it was very clear to me that, okay, this is not going to work. I could sit here, I could like meditate. That didn't work earlier. I could count sheep, which never works for me. I just lose count of the sheep and then just get irritated. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get up and I'm just going to watch something. And I put on Disney Plus, and I was watching the Ahsoka series, which for those of you who don't know, it is a Star Wars series. Ahsoka was a character who is the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker, who later became the persona of Darth Vader, very popular persona. And Ahsoka is now played by the masterful Rosario Dawson, who I just love her in everything she does. And so I was watching it, and it was one of the best Star Wars I've seen in a long time. And it is one of those things where it left me awake for hours after. I'm running on barely any sleep right now, which is not great. But I think they're getting back to the purism of George Lucas a little bit, in that Star Wars was based on the meta myth. And that's the whole cycle of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell laid out, pointing to the fact that every society, every religion, everything that we have that's ideological in any way, shape, or form, even the basis of our own lives, if you look back, it follows that meta myth. You've never seen a great film that has not followed that journey. You've never read a compelling novel. And to be fair, a well-written biography or autobiography will follow that same format, because our story doesn't start at the beginning. Our story pretty much starts at the call. And it's just for the geeks like me that are listening to this right now, Ahsoka is struggling. She's struggling for many, many years, trying to reconcile that her master, her teacher, someone she loved more than anything, became, next to the Emperor, the most evil person in the galaxy, committed complete atrocities. He was like the personification of evil. And she's scared that if that was her master, she probably has that somewhere inside of her. So she's living this constrained life where she lacks freedom and expression. She's like Ahsoka the Grey. And then she gets into a fight and she loses. And she meets Anakin in the world in between worlds. And the lesson he tries to teach her there is one of redemption. And I think it's so relevant, especially in a time where so many people seem to be struggling. And there's this feeling of having once lived as your old self in the old world, the status quo. And now, post-COVID, this is almost like a new world. And some people are thriving in it and some people are languishing. And it's the reconciliation of both worlds and all sides of you and embracing that frees you and leaves you to do really good. And I think meeting Anakin, he wasn't Anakin, his old self, purely of the light before he turned to the dark, and he wasn't the darkness. He had control and he had acceptance of all sides of him. And it's from that perspective that he had the power to understand what his motives truly are and how that lent themselves to the very best within him, and how that also, because sometimes our best qualities are our biggest liabilities. And it was those exact qualities that led him to the dark side. And he teaches her this in this battle, and he takes her through memories of these clone wars that they had fought together. And her conclusion is, I want to live. And she reawakens with this optimism and this energized perspective on life. And I was like, wow, I can't imagine anybody. So the first thing I did is I texted my wife. I was telling her about this, Amy. And then I texted my boss, Lisa. So I've just been going on about this all day, and I still am. Not because I'm such a Star Wars fan, which I kind of am, but more for what the meta myth represents and the relevance in everybody's life. So that's what I did with my insomnia last night, Tiffany. You did ask.
That went deep. And it went further than I could cling on, because like I said to you, I did zero knowledge of Star Wars. So I want you to go deeper into, I want you to unpack that more for the rest of us that don't follow Star Wars, don't have any idea of the characters' names you just referred to, or their background or their story. Like, give me more, make this relevant to talk more about life and us and people and circumstances and how this applies. Because I'm grasping a bit of it, But I just kept, as you were talking, I kept trying to fill the gaps of shit I didn't know when you would name Star Wars people that I have zero inclination to know about.
That is fair enough. Not everyone speaks geek.
Yeah, I don't speak geek.
That. But here's a language we all speak, and that is us. And what is most meaningful, what is most painful, poignant. We've all gone through struggles and have had triumphs. And I said something earlier, and I don't think it's a throwaway comment at all, where stories do not start at the beginning. They start at the call. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong with stories. And, you know, when you get into Robert McGee, and he had written the book Story, Robert McGee is a screenwriting guru. So he is, I think that earlier on in a conversation today, this morning, this is all fresh in my mind. The analogy I used was that Robert McGee is to story as Albert Einstein was to physics. And what he talks about is we mistake narratives for stories. Stories have narratives, but stories are not narratives. Like a lot of times you've asked somebody, well, what was your story? Well, you know, I was born here on this date and I grew up in that. That is not your story. That is your narrative. That is chronology. That's not an element of where a compelling story begins. I'm not saying it's not important, but we all have a pivotal point in our life. And for some people, it could be like, I just moved overseas. Massive, massive, disruptive life change and decision. And there are things that flow out of that. Or for some people, it could be when you got married, or it could be that life started over for you, you know, when your partner sadly passed or when you got a divorce. And there was something that disrupted your life, the status quo. And that woke you up to a quest, something that you wanted, something that became apparent, or something that you needed to do to fix this disruption. Not to go back and make it exactly the same, but to reconcile it. And in story, that is called the quest. So, you know, that's like, again, like I know, not to use another Star Wars reference, when Luke's auntie and uncle were killed by the Empire. You know, he was a teenager. So the story didn't start when Luke was born and how he grew up and, you know, what his favorite food was and where he went to school. It started at that critical turning point. And he met Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was his mentor. So there's something that disrupts your life. And then there's a call. There's something that life, even in the worst of circumstances, or sometimes the best of circumstances, is demanding of you. And what most people do, the hero of the story, the protagonist, is they refuse the call. And we've all had that, where we start to rationalize why we should do nothing, because change can be terrifying. And we're attached to things the way our life is now, even if our life has been completely disrupted. Like, you know, I remember 9/11. I was very attached to who I thought I was and my role in the world. So I had all these identity issues. I loved my job and my world was completely disrupted. But all I wanted to do was go back home to the way things used to be, my metaphorical and literal home. The problem was I didn't have a home anymore. It was metaphorically and literally uninhabitable. So there's this starting over. And the first thing you do is you deny it. You deny it. You start to bargain. You try to do anything to avoid going. But what happens in life is you start to realize that, man, me taking no action is even more painful than the consequences of any action I will take. So you start to take actions, and when you take actions, you create problems, unforeseen problems. You try to fix something, you accidentally make it worse. I mean, everybody's gone through that. But every time you solve a problem, you overcome a challenge, you grow. You become bigger than the problem you just solved. And then you run into problems that are too big for you. And this is with any story. any mythology. It could be a religious story. It could be something from the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita. There are mentors and guides that show up. Like, so for Frodo in Lord of the Rings, another storyline that follows the meta myth very closely. It was Gandalf. For a struggling athlete, it's the emergence of a coach. Although coaches are not mentors, but it's someone who shows up that is a guide that helps you or gives you knowledge or insight that allows you to overcome challenges that you wouldn't have normally overcome. And then all of these challenges start to surmount to the major ordeal where you either are defeated, a part of you or something in you dies. In some stories, the price of failing here is literal, not metaphorical death, or you can turn around and you can go home and your story ends there. But if you accept that challenge, and this is where your guide leaves you, because you can't be helped with this. This ordeal is so big and so personal, you have to face it on your own. And when you cross the threshold, the result of this is transformation. And in many cases, redemption. There's this renewal. And then you get to go home to the place that you started. But home might be the same. Very often it's not, but you are never the same. And what you learn, the lessons you learn along the way, the resources you acquire, the knowledge you now possess, it's not just for you. It's for the kingdom. It's for the tribe. It's for the person that you rescued. So you touch people in a very profound way as a result of your own personal transformation. And that is pretty much the cycle, the journey that we all go through. And that is how our brains are wired. And that is the cycle of story that we all respond to on a psychological and probably at this point a neurobiological level. And what was really powerful with what I was watching yesterday is, so my friend and boss, asked me a really powerful question this morning. She was like, how many people are living lives where it turned out exactly the way you thought? And the answer is very few. We all have our checklists in one way or another. Some people are more serious about it than others. But we always say, okay, well, I imagine my life is going to go this way. But because life is so dynamic, it doesn't go the way you want it to or expect it to. But those trials bring out the very best and the worst of you, and they allow you to become who you are today. And a lot of times not getting exactly what you want in the way you thought you wanted it was the very best thing that could ever occur in your life. And we very often, we've talked about this on the podcast, we cling to and we have biases around the good parts of us, our strengths, but we live in denial about the dark parts of us. And that limits us because we're not a whole person and we're not in the space of acceptance. And if we don't acknowledge the darkness, we can't recognize when we're stepping into it because we rationalize it as being some part of our light. So we don't draw a definitive line. Okay, this is who I am when I'm at the worst version of myself. This is my shadow. I shall not cross this line. You don't know where the line is until you acknowledge who that individual is and that they are just as much a part of you as the things that you admire most, the things that you are most proud of. And because you know where that line is, you don't lose control of your behaviors and rationalize them, you gain them. And with Anakin in the World Between Worlds, he was able to go back and forth from the light side to the dark side. He was both Vader and Anakin. He was both Jedi and Sith. And because of that, he had insights and control, and he was able to understand his motives, because his motive, and again, forgive me if you don't know the Star Wars mythos, but you'll understand this. His motive for everything started from trauma. And a lot of us can relate to that. He loved his mother dearly. And after he left as a child to be trained, his mother was brutally murdered. And he was never able to reconcile that. He was never able to forgive himself for that. So his main motivation was, I'm going to make sure that the people I love the most never get hurt and certainly never die. Now, whilst that is highly altruistic, it's nearly impossible. How could you make sure that the people you love the most never get hurt or in profound ways? And then when his wife got hurt, and he couldn't stop that either. In some cases, she was the cause of that. It was that guilt that caused him to be manipulated and descend into the darkest recesses of who he was. And it's only in our acceptance of ourselves, our whole selves, that we could truly love ourselves. And it's only when we truly love ourselves, we become the type of person that does not cause distress and harm to other people. See, the problem there is Anakin felt guilty in the very beginning about things that he could not control. And when we do something that's wrong and that's hurtful, I think guilt is really important. It is a critical emotion, and we deserve to feel it. And I love these videos about eliminate guilt. That makes you what we would call a sociopath. Mm-hmm. I don't think you want to do, and sociopaths, even in some cases, experience guilt. The difference is guilt is around a set of actions. It's something you did, where with Anakin, that progressed long enough to become deep-rooted shame. And shame lies not just around what we do. It is our perception of who we are. And shame causes us to be ugly. And I'm not talking about physically ugly. I'm talking about ugly in our behaviors, and because we carry our distress and it infects people around us. And it's only when we're totally free that we don't engage in repetitive patterns of behaviors. Most often, there's always a caveat to what I'm saying, but we don't engage in those patterns that cause people distress. We become what the title of a really short but well-written book that was recommended to me, we become the sun and not the salt. And that talks about how every living thing, people, organisms, plants, lean towards what is analogous to sun, to what gives life, to what nurtures them. Where if you pour salt on the roots of a plant, it'll wither and die. And when we're living in shame because we cannot accept and reconcile our dark side, we become the salt to everyone around us. But when we're in acceptance, we can become the sun. We can become a source of nourishment and strength and life when we are around people because of the mindset, the behaviors, pretty much the energy we bring to every interaction. I think, wow, I was watching that completely filled with insomnia, and I was exhausted, and that actually energized me last night.
It's good to have you back. It's good to have you back, Bobby. All right. This is interesting. So many interesting thoughts around this. And I love just listening to you draw out insight from things like this. And it's in line with, I did, yesterday I sat down and recorded an episode around a post I did this week. So I've been thinking about this like a lot more. I mean, not just recently, just over time, my mind mulls this over a lot. So the post that I wrote was but something along the lines of what if tomorrow we wake up and realize that yesterday, which was once today, all of the yesterdays were the best it was ever going to get. And we wasted them on worrying about the small stuff, like sweating the small stuff. We were never present. And then we wake up, and whether it be a circumstance or something happens and life gets tough, because we all think that we're trying to, right now, everyone's trying to get through a tough thing, especially if they're tuning into episodes like this, specifically thinking about it, right? How do I get through this thing? How do I how do I get that promotion? How do I reach that financial goal? How do I get success? How do I get the relationship? How do I fix in inverted commas my trauma or my self-awareness or how do I stop making the same mistakes? So we're all on this continuum where we're moving forward to get to the better place. But what if the better place is now? Because what if tomorrow Tiff wakes up and discovers something irreversible where life will become harder, whether that's physical, mental, or emotional or circumstantial? What if I wake up tomorrow and life can never be the same, and I look back to all of my life up until this moment right now and I go, God, I never knew how blessed I was, and now I don't have that, and all I have, and I wasted it because in the moment I was so worried about getting to that next thing or solving the problem or reaching success. So I think about acceptance. I think about in the middle of striving, how do I also accept that sometimes hard shit is on the doorstep and we're in the middle of it, and so I want to try and be content and accept what I can, and also not just lie down and accept, but accept the portion of things that I can't change, be in the moment, still focus on the good, but still strive forward. Can we accept the moment without it being at the cost of the drive to move forward, or will we still get to the end and have appreciation for the hard thing if we sit in it, if we sit with it, or do we have to reach that tipping point of a severe emotional distress in order to get to the other side of the hero's journey? Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I think it lands with me. It probably lands with everyone listening. I don't think there's the answer that applies to everyone. And I'm sure that if there is a universal right answer, I don't have it. But what I'm going to say to that, you're probably going to slap me when you see me at the gym later. It's the paradox. I know I haven't banged on about the paradox.
There it is.
It's both. Is it? So yeah. Before I hopped on a plane and came to Melbourne, without getting into it, so many things in my life really blew up, and it was unanticipated. And it's not like I did something to generate all these problems, actually, but they were mine just the same. Kind of like you didn't cause it, but your responsibility to deal with it. And I was a mess. And in the midst of my struggles, I had reached out to a really good friend of mine. She's probably one of my closest friends. And she's also one of the top therapists in the United States in the area of dealing with neurodivergence, people like me. And our conversation turned into a 90-minute therapy session. And, I was talking about not being present. Here I am with everything going wrong, things that from my childhood, I thought as my identity, I was like, I will never let this happen. Like when a kid is traumatized because their parents went through a brutal divorce and they're like, I will never be like that. I will never get a divorce. And then later on, they're divorced in their adult life. And it's like, there's a lot to unpack there. There's complexity. It doesn't make you a villain, but how you feel about it is devastating. And something happened with me in my life where I was like, I will make sure I am never here. And I worked so hard and took so many, and it happened. And I put, there are just certain things that the way I'm wired, and I put certain importance on logistical issues that were not the really big issues. But I said, okay, if I could just do this, you start telling yourself a story over and over and over, especially when you do clinically have OCD, or definitely obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And finally, it becomes this all-consuming thing, like this has to happen. And it was unrealistic. And when it didn't, I started just spiraling and not really taking account of, okay, where are you today? And what could you really be grateful for? Listen, not just listen to people, listen to the situation, like be still and pay attention. And it was a really painful time. And I think one of the things that my friend had said to me is there's got to be a balance where, for me, and this is just an assessment of who I am. You could tell me, well, I need you to read these 10 books and assimilate them down into, I don't know, anything, a half day session, an all day seminar, a keynote. And other people will take months to do that. I'll get that done in a couple of weeks and it will work. It'll land. And I could teach you how to do it as well. And so I'm really, really good at that. But the other side of me is day-to-day things like, getting into my email accounts, downloading apps, things that are so simple, people take them for granted as non-things. It's almost like switching on a light. Nobody sits there with anxiety and shame, and they're paralyzed because they're so afraid. Oh my God, am I going to be able to turn this light switch on? And I'm not saying that's me. I'm very good at switching on and off lights, but it's simple things like that paralyze me, and people don't understand. Because if they don't have a neurodivergent brain in the way I do, it's like, how could this be an issue? You could travel around the world. You could write, you could speak, you could do all these things, but you can't do this. And it's just, for me, I've always tried and become paralyzed because I didn't want people to look at me in a certain way. So I would put so much effort into it. And it's a source of shame. And my friend, she was like, well, you've got to accept that this is who you are. And there are certain things you cannot do. Like, she was talking about herself. She's on the spectrum. Both her kids are on the spectrum. And she's like, so when there is a kid with autism and they're banging their head against the wall and their head is bloody and their parents are freaking out, they don't know what to do, and nobody can handle the situation, she will come up with an intervention strategy on the fly. It will work. But if you ask her to send you a book, DHL, she can't do it. It's just like, how is that possible? So she's speaking from empathy. And because she struggles with the same things I do. She's like, you've got to totally accept that. And you've got to be very clear with people and try to surround yourself with people where they can handle things you can't handle. So you could do what you do exceptionally well. But at the same time, that doesn't stop you from striving to get better at it. Because even if you strive to the point where somebody would master that and all you do is move like a centimeter out of a whole meter that you have to go, that by itself is beneficial for you. So it's like striving and acceptance has to come at the same time. It's not like you resign yourself. Well, this is just me. I can't do anything about it. It's no, this is me. I accept it. I accept that people won't understand. I accept this is not hard for anyone, but it's hard for people like me. There's another show I love, Boston Legal, and in Singapore, that people told me that I reminded them of one of the main characters. I started watching the show and really got into it. But there's another character who has like Tourette's and probably some other issues. His name's Jerry, and he's an admirable character. I love this character, but he's got all these really weird behaviors. And it's so he can, if he has the right prop and he has the right conditions, he can go into court and be masterful in front of a jury. And he could do more research and synthesize it for the relevance of the case than anybody else. It's almost like he operates like an AI version of an attorney. But to have a social conversation with someone is paralyzing. And he'll just sit there and purr and yelp and bark and like put his hands on his thighs and jump up and down. It's like, it's comedic. But when I look at him, I'm like, oh, I also, that's not the character people said I reminded them of, but I so identify because that is me. And I struggle with that. You know, a lot of times what people see as social prowess is me just trying to integrate work into a conversation, because when it comes to small talk, I am completely incapacitated and I get extremely weird. And I start saying really inappropriate things and making jokes that don't come off as funny. I mean, you've been at the receiving end of a lot of this because the way my brain's wired, it's excruciating for me, where other people do it, you know, second nature, but passing the bar exam on the first try and acing it like Jerry, well, that's really difficult. So people don't understand. But you have to strive to be better and at the same exact time accept yourself.
Yeah.
Because total acceptance might lead to, I don't want to say excuses, but complacency. And total non-acceptance might lead you down a very dark path. You have to walk that duality.
You remind me of a meme. I'm sure you've seen it. There's a little something on socials that goes around with like a bottle of water, and it talks about how you go to the supermarket and you get this bottle of water for $1, and you go to the service station, you get the same bottle of water for $2, and you go to the AFL grand final and you get the same bottle of water for $8, and it's like, so next time you think you're worthless or you're not valuable, you're just in the wrong place. And I think that lands with a lot of people. It's understanding that the same thing in different situations is valued differently. The same person's valued differently. However, the question is how, like you said, the duality of how do we manage and understand that, and then move through the world with all of these different people and different reactions, different perspectives that project onto us and we project onto them. How do we balance that? How do we utilize that? How do we manage our perception and self-awareness and have both an open mind and be open to reflecting on us, but also hold our ground where we need to? There's a neurodiverse people listening will be, I've had a lot of conversations recently on the show about ADHD and this idea of, if you go and say to some, 5 different people, you walk down the street and you go, I've got ADHD, you'll get 5 different responses. And some of them they're really hard because people have all these different perceptions of what that even means. And I think it's one of the easiest ones, especially lately, because there's so much more conversation around it. And it's hard not to be affected by people's comments or treatment or opinions or expectations. What's your advice, Capuccio?
Well, I mean, there are tools and there are strategies and there are philosophies, and I've used some and they've helped me. Some a little, some a lot. But if I had that completely figured out, I wouldn't be struggling with this daily. And that is something I always try to bring to this show, is this honesty where, and I know you've heard me talk about one of the things I hate. I don't hate it. It's just, I struggle with it is when, tell your story. Because it's not that I don't want to share. I do. And it's not like I don't think my story has any benefit that positively impacts people. It does. And it's not like I won't tell it. I do. But a lot of times what people are looking for is the answer to their deepest struggles. And there's a certain way they expect a story to go. They expect complete transformation and redemption, back to that meta myth, where I land in a space where if you know my story and you know what I do for a living and what I've done in my career, there's a lot of, I guess, inspiration. But if you know me day to day and what I still struggle with, it's a lot messier. Because people want to know, how did you overcome? I haven't completely overcome anything. I guess I've dealt with it better than I would have had I not been striving. But it's almost like, if you're in a race and someone has a Formula One race car and you're in a golf cart, You could try as hard as you want. You could take as many driving lessons. You could be more perseverant. You could want it more than anyone else. You could have superior will. Your vehicle is very different. There is no way you're going to win that race. And you could take all the throwaway things we talk about in self-help, about like the power of determination and complete commitment. And it's not about motivation. You're going to lose. And you're probably better off if you cannot change vehicles. Let's say for whatever reason, you're stuck in a golf cart. I don't know why. Maybe you live on, I don't know, Catalina Island, where that's all that's allowed. You're going to have to reshape your life where you can really win at things related to golf carting. I don't even know if that's a thing. I don't know if anybody write in if you've ever gone golf carting and you've made a sport or a career out of it. Maybe that's what a caddy does, but how do you add value from where you are? And how do you show up as someone who lives their values and as a result adds value within your vehicle? I think, again, it's that paradox. It's thriving, yet at the same time accepting.
Well, I think one of the fundamental flaws in our thinking is even just the terminology of fixing. Like there's some sort of a baseline or a right or a perfect or a way that we are supposed to be, and then when we uncover these experiences in our life, like you have, like I have, like most of the listeners have to some degree, and maybe some of them hasn't yet, and that time is yet to come for them. But we discover things and we realize that they have some answers to why we are the way we are and why we function this way. And the first thing, I mean, it took me years to get past the idea of fixing that. Oh, I've got to fix myself so that I function like everybody else functions. Well, everybody else is functioning off their version of the same dysfunction as me. It's their experience that's shaped them. And then this social expectation that there's a way to be. And it's like, no, what I need to do is learn how to accept what I need to accept and how to start moving the needle on what I need to move the needle on, so that my version of a great life and great progress is easier for me to achieve, and I can live like that. I can function better now that I know myself better and I know what's created it. But yeah, this whole idea of fixing things. Oh, I am ADHD. Like I have that label, yet my relationship with it is my relationship with that label right now as I stand is it's a label that gives me a cluster of understanding and tools and I don't know, like maybe behaviors or coping mechanisms, or it brings my awareness to things, to the way I think and the way I function and the way I do and the way I feel. And sometimes it gives me words for that. But it crosses over with, and for me, I still don't look at it as a condition or a thing. I look at it as it is a developmental outcome that I really resonate through which parts of those things have come from the experiences that I have had so far as I have looked back into my life and learned what I've learned. And I bet you that is probably really, maybe I'm at 10% now, which is a lot. I started at 0 and now I've learned 10% of things that shaped me, experiences that happened, and I've learned about how that can make a person develop and think and feel and behave and affect the nervous system and all of that. And maybe I'm at a cracking 10%. I've still got 90% to go, and I'll never get to 100. Because it's impossible.
I love that. That is, I love that. Can we call that step one? Because you were asking, how do you? Let's call that step one perspective. And perspective breaks down in a few really useful ways. And the first one is, what are the things that I struggle with? Let me understand this. Let me reflect. Let me use self-reflection as honestly as I'm capable of utilizing it, given my cognitive biases, which for a lot of people, I know for me, are many. Mm. There's not this one thing like this shape I am supposed to have. And if I don't fit into that shape, well, like I'm broken or I'm defective. No, you are you. And the thing about when you have a shape that people expect and that shape fragments, it fractures and it breaks into pieces, you can now reform that with a lot more freedom and flexibility into something that is more conducive for you and adds value to others than you could if that wasn't broken. So that's a great metaphor for putting back together what was broken as being a doorway to opportunity. But you're not broken. There's not a standard of who you need to be. The second part of perspective is, where are you really, really good? Because ADHD makes life extremely difficult for a lot of people. I don't want to say all because I don't want to over-categorize. Well, people with ADHD are this, but with me, if something catches my attention and I understand the environment where I don't work well, but the environment where I really do, it is a superpower. So it's almost like an exchange. You might not like eating vegetables at first, but there is an exchange where those nutrients feed your brain and your body in ways that will allow you to feel and perform amazing over time. So it's an exchange that you're reconciling, and your perspective shows you how to leverage that. The second thing I think you were talking about with perspective is, people insist that you show up a certain way. And I know that previously I've been very upset at people who try to impose their will and their opinions on other people. Well, you should be like this. You should live like this. You should think like that. You chose this. So I remember when I was living in a certain neighborhood and this person was complaining. This was really interesting. This person was complaining that, when people park, but they take up 2 spots, there's enough room if they move up or back, somebody else, but they don't do that. And it's very hard to find a spot. And she was like, I had my kid in the back crying, who was starving. I just got off a very long day of work. My nerves are fried. I just want to go home. And it's like, I could have parked there, but there are so many people who are just really not considerate. And, I can understand that. Now, she's complaining about life should be like this, but it's not. Yet I was able to identify, because that is a little bit inconsiderate. And sometimes people don't do that on purpose. Given the configuration of where the cars are, they might have done that, but then a car might have pulled out. So it looks like they did something they didn't. You don't really know. But given her state and her view of what social conscientiousness should look like, I can understand that when you're upset, you're exhausted, you have a screaming kid in the car, that's a problem. And this guy writes, well, you chose to live in this neighborhood. You made this decision. So, I would be more positive, or make a better decision, move to a different neighborhood where that's not and I'm just like sitting there going, you complete wanker. Like, really? But now I'm understanding, it's interesting because lately I'm like, no, that person imposes a super rigid perspective, and it almost comes out like an accusation wrapped in weaponized, insincere positivity around decisions and empowerment, because that person probably feels out of control in so many aspects of his life. When somebody comes at you like that, especially when they don't know, it's not you. It's really not you. I mean, sometimes it is you. You can provoke that, but a lot of times how people are engaging with you, and how people insist that you should be this and live like this and think like this, they're struggling. That's an inward struggle. And while you should never accept disrespect, you could still take a stand for yourself, not define yourself by other people's expectations, reflect on, hey, maybe they have a point, right? Am I creating something that's causing this response? And at the same time, be empathetic and go, right, this has nothing to do with me. That's them. That's perspective. Because you know when to reflect you know when to deflect it and walk away because it has nothing to do with you.
I've been thinking about this idea lately too, and it's something that I've done to a degree a lot more recently over the years. Is that idea of like when we are listening to somebody who is on a completely different page to us and we feel strongly about it and we feel like, as we feel like we could add value by telling them our side or convincing them or leading them. Sometimes just pausing, like what if for the next 30 days, every time I was in communication with people, what if I paused and chose just to listen and not to answer, just to listen and only answer with curiosity, not with affirmation, and definitely not with any like argument or debate? What if I just considered everything for 30 days? You know, because we never think of what's the outcome, especially when we're emotional, and we're emotional really quickly, and it doesn't have to be highly emotional, but when we have a conversation and somebody says something, I mean, I get this a lot because this podcast and the conversations I've had with the people around the world has given me so many resources and so much understanding and so many different perspectives. And in different conversations, a new perspective can stand out and give you a whole new light. And sometimes that is liberating, but that's liberating for me. But where is this person at? And for me, just spitting that out as I want to right now because it excites and intrigues me and it's changed my world and perception. Do they even have the capacity to, like, what's the outcome if I say this? Or am I best just to listen and consider? And what will happen in my mind if I just consider all the conversations over the next 30 days instead of argue or debate? How will that change how I process things, how people process me, how I interact, how I observe, how I see and feel, how I go away and process conversations? Like even just the ripple effect of that, don't you think, could potentially have ongoing effects?
Oh, I think, there was a situation where if I would have just hit the pause button very recently, things would have gone quite differently in a constructive way. But you're right, when you're stressed and you're emotional and you lack perspective, that is very hard to do. So if step one is perspective, and this seems like it's becoming hierarchical because you need one to enable the other, the second one might be pause and reflect. You don't have to state your case. You don't need an answer right this second. Unless the situation or someone is demanding that of you. And even then, you don't necessarily need to respond to that demand. You could be civil and compassionate and explain why you don't want to respond. But I think a lot of times we feel I need to have an answer. I need to have an account or explain, and you don't. So I think step one is perspective. Step two is pause and reflect. Maybe step three. I don't know if this is in an exact order, but it's kind of like what we're doing right now, what I did the other day. Although I should have taken more time between my response and this, is when you talk to people who understand you. Who are the people that you trust? They are never judging you. And you can have an open conversation. They don't take it as, oh, that was an invitation for advice. Let me tell them what I would do, or if I were you, or what you should do. They just hold that space. And these are the people in your tribe. And then after that, maybe if there's another step, is what worked out of that conversation? What are the tools? What are the strategies? What are the resources? And implement them. And what now? Because I think what happens a lot of times, and this is all very poignant for me. we get into a state where we are, to put it mildly, not at our most resourceful, and we stuff things up. But then we tell ourselves a story either about that was not my fault, I had nothing to do with that. No, it might not have been your fault, but saying you had nothing to do with that is a stretch. You probably had a lot to do with it. Or we go the other way. This is all my fault. I ruined it. What now, though? Like, what now? Yesterday's history. What are you going to do today? Is there a way that you can learn something from that? Do something, make it right, reconcile. You can, and we've all done this. I know I ruminate a lot where something went wrong over the past day or week. And I'm like, oh, if I only would have done this, if I only would have. Trillions of people have come and died on this planet, and they've played that game with themselves. Never once did somebody will themselves back in time and have a second shot at it. It's probably not going to work for you. Unless, of course, you are truly someone from Star Wars and you're a force wielder to where you can bend space and time.
Yeah, but this also, Bobby, comes back to that what we were discussing earlier of the, like, in hindsight, this is going to bring you to another, like, we are where we are. If only I had have done that. No, you'd miss out on the lesson. This is the thing. So
yeah,
how close can we rein in the acceptance where it's useful and we stop that?
Yeah. What can I learn and what do I do? And the what can I do should carry over the lesson of what went wrong. So if you were discompassionate with someone and that caused the problem, what can I do and how can I do it with compassion? If it caused pain, is there a way I can alleviate pain? And nothing you do guarantees a response from the other person, or you might get the response you don't want. It's not like the world is going to fall at your feet and go, oh, well, you're doing the right thing, so therefore you're going to get rewarded in the response we get. That's out of your control. But what can you do in that moment? If you couldn't listen to someone because you were okay, how do I really move forward and listen now? Because the only thing you could do is what now? I so wonder, because everything in the world, in the universe we live in, seems to be so chaotic, yet at the same time so ordered. What if the structure of the reality we live in is just to move things forward and evolve? I'm not just talking about biological. I'm talking about spiritual and psychological evolution. And maybe that's why we're stuck in space and time. Like, we perceive space and time as forward and linear. And maybe that's because we can't go back and constantly correct things that didn't go our way, because maybe we'd be in this state of protecting and correcting rather than evolving, even though that evolution is excruciatingly painful at times. Like, we refer to physical growth as growing pains. Maybe that's emotional and spiritual as well. Maybe that's part of the process, and that's why we experience this linear reality. We're going back, at least at this stage in humanity, is just not possible. Maybe it's the inability to go back that drives us forward.
Yeah. Mic drop. I reckon we end it there. I've loved this. God, it's good to have you back. Back into your bloody riffing the world apart. And
I thought you meant back in Melbourne, but
well, it's not good. Back in Melbourne for me. I mean, it is, but it's just finally in Melbourne. Did you tell everyone you bought me that shit chocolate and I bloody ate the whole block in it, and then I abused you? Exactly what I told you was going to happen. It's exactly what I said would happen.
But here's the other end of it, right? So I know we've wrapped. I learned a lesson. I did something bad that caused pain. I bought Tiffany an array of sweets that I knew she would enjoy. And then in lockdown, in the middle of the pandemic, I reconciled that because I couldn't send it to her, I was going to eat them. And for years, Tiffany was upset by this. And I said, one day I will make this right. And I have been, maybe overkill, but I've been buying you quantities of chocolate. And I will continue to with sensible portion sizes in the future. See? So I've learned.
See? Here we
And
are
now
moving forward.
I overcorrected, and in trying to solve the problem, created a different problem. Now I created this is our meta myth. We are on the hero's journey together, Tiffany.
Oh, thanks, Bobby.
Bye, Tiff. See you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.